energetic for its time to shake and stir things up. Our next session, Shaken and Stirred, looking at global Litfests with a twist, will be including Michelle Garnaut, who is an award-winning restaurateur, cultural ambassador, and philanthropist, who has continued to lead the way by running and founding her own not-for-profit, a literary festival, a writer's residency, female empowerment programs, and cultural events, all while simultaneously running a successful business. We also have Julia Roberts, who is the director of the Ginger and Spice Festival in United Kingdom, and they will be in conversation with Sirish Rao, who is a writer, festival producer, and publishing professional. He's also the former director of the award-winning Tara Books. The session will be moderated by Meenakshi Alimchandani, who specializes in South Asian literature and authors and has been the primary coordinator for the South Asian segment of the Toronto International Book Fair. For further details about our panelists, please do visit our website, that is www.aklf.in. I shall hand over proceedings to Meenakshi ma'am now. Just a little request that hopefully we can move into an audience question and answer round by around 4:45, 4:50-ish. Right, I'll do that.
To sorry, that's my nervousness. To the Apeejay Kolkata Literature Festival, its organizers and the wonderful volunteers that you have for inviting us all here on the panel. Thank you very much once again. I would like to start with Michelle, and who would tell us a little bit about herself and her work that she does, the wonderful work she does with the festival in Shanghai.
Welcome. Wow, right on time. Right, quite remarkable. I'll kick off by telling you a little bit about how we started a literary festival in Shanghai. I'm in the restaurant business, so our business is the restaurant. That's what pays the rent. And I think for me it came from a different angle than many. It's not led by government. It's not led by sort of writers' association. It's actually, for me, led by a love of literature and actually wanting to work within a community to give back into a foreign community. My restaurant is in Shanghai, yes, Shanghai in China. And of course, I'm not Chinese, as you can see. So for me, there was not, in 2003 when we started, there was actually not much much of an arena for cultural exchange or the exchange of ideas. And that was one reason that we got going. When we started, it was one writer the first year. I don't know you can really call that a festival, but we did. And within about 3 or 4 years, it was 3 weeks and a much bigger affair. So that's a little bit about the festival. I'll talk a bit more about it later. We'll let everybody explain what they do.
Hello, my name is Sirish Rao. I grew up here, in Bangalore, and worked in publishing. I ran with other people a small independent publishing house called Tara Books, which some of you might have seen, and got involved in the early days with the Jaipur Literature Festival, which has now become a giant beast. But I moved to Vancouver for love, which is a good reason to move anywhere, the other side of the world, and sort of started a festival really because my wife is from Canada, I'm from India. You couldn't find 2 places more far apart, and you also couldn't find 2 places with as little cultural and intellectual traffic, partly because of the distance, partly because of how different they are. And so it was a very personal thing to try and get people together, to try and get 2 worlds to talk. And being a writer myself, having worked in publishing, I enjoy having wonderful, crazy, eccentric artists around. And so one good way to do that is to start a festival. And so it was born from that very personal thing of wanting to see what would happen if we brought people together under an umbrella. And so the festival's called Indian Summer. It takes place in Vancouver, which is a beautiful, temperate rainforest with mountains and ocean next to each other. And I think the festival, I'll go into that a bit more, but in the early days we started in partnership with the Jaipur Literature Festival, and then it broke off to be its own thing. Like characters in a novel, you create them and then they want to do their own thing. So a festival is a bit like that. It will end up doing what it wants. But I think at the root, my approach to doing a festival is to go to its root word, which is feast, and to put together a sort of feast for the mind, for the senses, create a place that doesn't prize the cerebral over the sensual, that argues for a kind of curiosity. And so the best way to describe my festival, I guess, is it's a festival for the curious mind.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Julia Roberts. As you can see, not the Hollywood actress. So sorry if I've disappointed any of you that have come all the way to see Julia Roberts. In actual fact, she has stolen my name. Her real name is Julie. So there you go. Still looking for Richard Gere if there's anyone out there. Anyway, so yeah, I run the Ginger and Spice Festival. I live in England, and that's where the festival takes place. It's an annual festival. We're now just in our third year. So the difference between the festival I run and the other festivals is it's quite in its infancy, which is interesting because we come across different challenges to perhaps the other panelists. The festival celebrates the culinary and cultural heritage of the town, which is very much celebrated for gingerbread and spices. And the reason it was started, I worked for a couple of organisations. My profession is communications. I worked for a charity and a tourist attraction and some other brands in the town. And we were looking for ways to explore a story that would attract people to come and visit us. The town council had explored about 20 years previously the notion of us being the home of gingerbread. A book had been written about it. We'd been branded as the home of gingerbread, and then this had just fallen silent, and no one was talking about it anymore. And it is exactly our unique selling point. So what I decided to do was sort of revitalize that story, pull the community together to talk about it and celebrate it. And I'll go on in a bit more detail later to tell you more details about why.
I live in Toronto, which is the most diverse and multicultural city in the world today, I'm happy to say. We also have a very large South Asian demographic, and by South Asian I mean India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and the Maldives. And I decided that, people are not aware of the rich and diverse literature that's coming out of these countries. We have authors who are living in Canada who've come in there or have been born there. And I said, why do I not explore this? Why do I not show this off to the world? And I got talking with, sorry about that. I got talking with the people from the Toronto International Festival of Authors, which is in its 40th year. And we had the first 2 afternoon dedicated last year in October called Suffer to South Asian programming. And I had authors in from Bangladesh, from Nepal, from the US. I had Vikas Swaroop, who wrote Slumdog Millionaire, is also India's High Commissioner to Canada, and it was wonderful. And the thing with TIFA is that it's in its 40th year. We've had 22 Nobel laureates come out and speak, over 90,000 authors, 9,000 authors, sorry about that, who've come in and exposed their work to the world. And this was the first time they did dedicated South Asian. And they were so glad with the response we had that they've programmed it again for October 2019. Thank you.
You've got the question.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for my panelists. And so how did you generate the idea of your festival? Also, how did you secure the funding? Most important.
Okay, so I'm number one. I get to start again. Excuse me. As I said, our festival came about really through our love of literature and seeing that there was a sort of hole. And actually, Sirish and I were talking earlier and saying that when you're an outsider and you come into a place, you see things differently. You have eyes that you see a situation and you see opportunities differently than people who have lived all their lives in a place. And I felt that there just wasn't really, at that time, 2003 in Shanghai, there just really wasn't much of an environment for curiosity, for cultural exchanges, and also sort of for a multicultural platform. So we started off with a couple. I'm from Australia originally, so of course I had the Australian consulate involved. The New Zealanders were easy to convince. The British Council was pretty supportive. At the time, within a year or two, I knew the Indian Consul General. So really, we sort of grew in that way. We grew organically, really, rather than with a very strong focus of this is what we're going to do and that sort of planning. It wasn't really how it happened. I think just on funding, just very quickly, we talked about this a little bit this morning. It's very different. I mean, I run a business and I decided that I would finance it. So I have tried to defray the costs as much as I can by having other people involved. We get some sponsors. We get some great friends who sponsor us, some companies. Sometimes companies will just come to us. Sometimes people who come to the festival regularly, maybe fly in from another place, will say, can we give you money? And it's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And the only costs that, because we have a venue and we pay the rent anyway, the only costs that we incur are the cost to bring writers, the hotels, or those sorts of things. So we do as much as we can to defray all of those costs. And we sell tickets, which is very different to both Jaipur here, where things are free. Although the tickets we try to keep at a very reasonable price, and we also have student tickets that are very reasonable. So we don't want to discourage anybody from coming. We want to encourage as many people as possible. But we're a relatively small venue. We can fit a max of about 130, 140 people. And because of that, and we've been going for so many years, it tends to be full and people know about it anyway. People want to come.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as Michelle was saying, and John Berger uses this wonderful phrase, the vertical invader. When you show up from somewhere else, you have an instant snapshot of a landscape that you might never get again, but as a traveler arrives. For me, Vancouver looked as if the Indian diaspora there was in a little bit of a time warp. Their experiences of India were when they left, and for the rest of Vancouver's population, another incredibly diverse city, there was a very strange idea of India, a very fossilized, museumized idea of what India was, and that as if everything it had to say was in the past and it was over. And I found that very problematic, and as someone who came from contemporary, pulsing, alive India, I wanted to share a bit of that and say, hey, no, you need to engage with it now. It is as bafflingly diverse as you can imagine, and that needs to start. So our very first event, I think, was Jan Martel, who wrote Life of Pi, with Tabu. And so putting the two of them together, and Tabu is, of course, very well known for her roles in Bollywood as well as Hollywood, and by putting them together, what we did was we had this audience in the room. So all the Jan Martel Canadian literature groupies were like, you don't know who Jan Martel is? And the other half of the room was saying, you don't know who Tabu is? And it was incredible to have these two groups of people who would never otherwise be sitting in the same place, urgently telling each other what they needed to learn about the person up there. So that really was kind of the inspiration, the opportunity that I saw. And you said, how do you secure funding? And I would never use the words secure and funding next to each other. We're always laying the tarmac as the plane is landing. It's like, oh, do we need a little bit more runway? And somehow it works, but we have many legs to stand on. We charge tickets, we get government funding, we get institutions to support us, and people who just want to make it happen. But a festival, like with a book, it's you can say what you like. It'll only have legs if people want it to happen. And you have to do that work to go out to an audience, to your supporters, and share that vision. And if your vision has an echo, then yes.
Thank you. Yes, likewise, in terms of being like the invader coming in, I worked in London for quite some years and I moved back to the area because I grew up around there. And I did have these sort of fresh eyes on the situation. They had an amazing story. There was so much to say, yet nobody was saying it. So that definitely, as I touched on in my introduction, was part of the motivation. Secondly, Market Drayton is a rural market town in Shropshire. I don't know how many of you know Shropshire. It's located between Birmingham and Manchester. We have about 12,000 people that live in Market Drayton, so it's not a big town, but it has a lovely heritage of having a market there for 750 years that was granted a charter by King Henry III. Now, we have lots of lovely artisan producers in the town selling cheeses. We have our own brewers. Yet, our high street has empty shops and betting shops. And as we all know, and this is a problem all over, there is a huge decline in the high street. So what do you do about that? And that was certainly one of the motivations for this festival, was how can we celebrate our local producers? How can we pull them together and support them and get people to start noticing them and buying from them and not the multinational supermarkets? It is a huge, huge challenge all over the United Kingdom. There are lots of festivals in the UK, and there are lots of food festivals that are doing just this to sort of reignite the high street. We absolutely keep our festival, the Saturday of our festival is a street market, which we call the Spice Exchange Street Market. It's free, and it will always be free. But with that comes huge challenges because we don't sell tickets. So, like Michelle, I funded the festival in the first year, and I'm still funding it partly. But that is not sustainable going forward. I'm not a multimillionaire like the other Julia Roberts. And so, I have to be very careful. So we've started to get sponsorship. We have a local brewery, Jules Brewery. They actually produce a beer called Kolkata, believe it or not, because of our links to your city. They are a sponsor. We have other businesses that wanted to get involved, but they don't give you a lot of money initially. It's little by little. They like to see that you're a success. They like to see that they're having brand awareness. So it is a challenge. I think going forward for the festival, we're going to be restructuring slightly. So we'll be trying to push the town council to get more involved and support us that way. We'll be doing private pop-up events, which will be ticketed. And then we'll also be setting up as a charitable arm on one of our events, which is a spice trail around the town, so we can access Heritage Lottery funding. And we're hoping to turn that into a digital trail for the schools and for children and tourists alike, exploring the heritage.
With me, the idea germinated when I came to Canada 18 years ago. There was not a lot of literature that was coming out of India. There was some being published out of Canada, and the US and the UK, but contemporary literature, there was very little, and I said, let me bridge the gap. And I started talking to publishing houses saying, include Toronto with your South Asian authors as a book, part of the book tour. And from there it morphed, and then the idea of Safar came out to me. Safar means journey, which is the name of my panels at the festivals of authors. And it was really very interesting to see the feedback I got, the kind of literature that was being published, not just by people in the English language, but with diverse languages as well. And the funding, Canada is fairly generous, as my fellow Canadian can say. I did get some funding from local sponsorships, some media sponsorships in kind, and it worked really well for us. My next question, I shall start.
I have one.
Mike, okay. What is the relevance of your festival to the community? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, Ameena. What is the relevance of your festival to the community? How did you engage with your audience, and what was the feedback?
Thank you. So I think I've touched on it slightly. The point of the festival is to celebrate the culinary and cultural heritage of the town, to sort of get local people to understand it and enjoy it and believe in it, to shout out about it and attract more people to come and visit us, that in turn supports us and our local economy. There was definitely a disconnect from the heritage. Lots of people knew that we were the home of gingerbread, but they weren't sure why. Also, they knew a little bit about the history, but didn't really know the people involved. And that, I think, is really, really sad, because our unique stories are so important in life, and particularly our community stories. There is a book that's been written called Under the Buttercross. We have this beautiful stone portico, 18th century building in the centre of the town called the Buttercross, where the butter and the dairy products were sold on the weekly market. And there was a lovely lady called Meg Pybers who discovered all the culinary history. She canvassed the community and got local recipes, and she's put them all in a book, which we're just working on a reprint of that, actually, so we can start to sell it at the festival. And that book is really exciting. And so the festival, we really want to tell the story about those recipes. And just remind me of the question. I'm rambling on. Yeah. Oh, so the community, yeah, why it's important. We are celebrating that at the festival and hoping that everybody else can then engage with it.
Well, I think if hello. I think if you're not relevant to a community, then that you're wasting your time. You're wasting everybody else's time too. I mean, the whole sort of thing of festivals. Festivals were either sort of yearly celebrations, I guess and a lot of them came from feasts, the word feast. What the point of that was that you had something special that happened for a short amount of time, so it was a special treat. And in a way, I think that what we all do is a bit like this is. I mean, it's a special treat for people in Kolkata to come and have all these writers and have ideas, and you're completely stimulated. I mean, that's how I always feel at the end of our festival. I feel like a head bursting with ideas, making things happen. How do you make it more interesting, more relevant to a diverse community? So for something like in Shanghai is a city of 26 million people. Ours is a tiny little snapshot, and it is a really diverse audience. So we have everybody from young Chinese students to older locals to an enormous international community. There's a big Indian community in Shanghai. So you have so many different people, and you have to try to find some way to touch all of them. And so I think that is the essence of what a festival is about. And the rest of it is you make it work. And how do you make it work with volunteers? We have there are 100 volunteers, I was told. I asked my volunteer who's helping to sort of ferry us around. So they're big organizations. And I think also the other thing that's really important is that people in the town or in the place, whether it's a small market town of 12,000, a city like Vancouver or Toronto, in big cities, or a city like Shanghai, people are proud. If they're interested in reading, and hopefully you're making more people interested in reading and interested in ideas and new ideas, because you're also a platform we've had, in our tiny little festival, we've had well over 1,000 writers, and of those, I would say we've had 1,000 writers from maybe 50 countries. So this is a lot of different people and a lot of different cultures, and that just opens the door and opens people's minds to things, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, in a way, what you try to do with a festival for your community is to delight and to disrupt at the same time in some way. And I think, initially it was that people were very proud to see a festival that had world-class thinkers and speakers from India being shown, because until then, if it was high art, it was the opera or, the art gallery, which didn't really reflect the reality of many people's cultural heritage. And suddenly there was this thing that was doing that. And so there was that pride. But at the same time, with the festival, we wanted to say it's not just about beating your chest about India as a global force. We should look at Pakistan, at Bangladesh, at Sri Lanka. We tried a little foray to say, can we go as far as Iran? Because a lot of Indian culture has been influenced by that. And if you really look, cultures everywhere have long, for centuries, had transactions with each other. And so we kept pushing the boundary of what community meant and what the focus of the festival meant. Until now, we now have indigenous artists from Canada, and a lot of indigenous artists have very similar approaches to storytelling, similar ways of looking at the world that we can explore. So it really became a conduit for us to try and get the world to meet, to make a place where maybe people could come and in fact be transported a little bit to another place. And that's what festivals do. I mean, I know this festival, and Mana Bhagat, its director, is sitting right here, so congratulations on 10 years. I mean, you have opened up the city, you know, and over the years that have come, it's been different venues. You've taken people into spaces, into physical spaces, also mental spaces, and that's what we try to do with festivals. Have I answered?
Yes,
Yeah,
very
okay.
well, thank you. Me? Okay. The relevance of festivals to my community is a sense of ownership. Canada is a country of immigrants. There is a sense of ownership that, yes, our art, our literature is being celebrated. It's out there for the world to appreciate, to read. Nothing like reading, nothing like literature to just open up your mind. And I had great audience feedback. I mean, the reason we've been asked to program a second year speaks for itself. I engaged the community by going out onto ethnic radio stations. I went out onto community newspapers, went into grocery stores, Indian grocery stores, Pakistani grocery stores, put up flyers, and just that's the way we spread the word. And we were surprised, people who we thought, you know, we never seen before it, where the usual literary do's and fests and meets were all there, and it was wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So the feedback was amazing. I mean, people came back and said, we didn't know there was a Nepalese writer living here. And or the Bangladeshi community came and said, did you know that he was published by HarperCollins? And, you know, literally there was this sense of delight of feeling at home, no matter what it is. Wherever you go in the world, the country of origin is always home. And my next...
Can I just add something? I actually would also just like to add that I think that the other thing that people want is real people-to-people discussion.
Yes.
I think we have so much that goes, you know, where you're reading things on social media or in newspapers or watching television or listening, but actually real sort of dialogue. And I think that is the interesting part of it's an opportunity for discussion and real people. They can't hide, they can't edit it. It's you're standing here, what we say is what you hear. And I think that many people, and especially I think young people, in my experience, are actually quite hungry for this. They want ideas, they want to hear things sort of at a first-hand level.
Absolutely, very, very right. And what's the difference between your festival and others? This one, you want to start? You want to start?
I think actually in many ways, we've all talked about that. And for all of us, it's a very different structure. The way that we structure the programming, I don't know, we want to talk about programming, the fundraising, the raison d'etre of the festival. For us, we are there. China is enormous, as you all know. There are 2 English language festivals in China, and there are not really very many Chinese language ones either. You know, I hope nobody's here from the Chinese government, but you know, they're got pretty strong opinions about open dialogue. It's not really encouraged very much. So you sort of have to, you know, I have to work around that. I have to sort of take all of that into account, and I have to still, you know, work with that and still present what I want to present. But I, of course, don't encourage dissidents, and we try to stay away from political world, but it's pretty hard, especially in this day and age. It seems to be getting more difficult to sort of not have a political statement. So much has become politicized, in our lives. So I think the way that we approach things is maybe a bit different.
I think maybe I gave that example of Jan Martel and Taboo. I think our festival prides itself a little bit on dialogue or bringing people together who might not come together in terms of artists as well. We do literature, but we also do music, the visual arts, film, and then we have multi-age groups, many venues, many cultures, and so it's this multi thing. And sometimes the festival is a lab, and you sort of don't know what's going to happen. One year I had a Nobel Prize winning geneticist with a jazz quartet, and they were both talking about dissonance. So the scientist was saying that in science, often discoveries happen when there are mistakes, when there are, say, a cancer is what leads you to understand gene structure. And the musicians were saying it's discordant notes, it's atonal, it's silence that leads you to understand music. And it was such an interesting conversation about how dissonance leads to discovery. But that thing could have also gone really wrong. And when you throw a party and you have a guest list that doesn't quite match, I mean, it's not the same kind of person, you're getting different people to meet, it can go very wrong. And there's also this terrible category called fusion, which to me is one of the most dangerous possible things, where everybody is speaking a third language badly rather than speaking their own language well. And so these are things to be very aware of, but I think it's very exciting when the audience and the artists know that they're on the edge of failure, and it could either go well or it could not. And you have to give some space for that, but yeah, to me that's exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the UK has many, many festivals going on all throughout the year. And Shropshire itself also has lots of food festivals. It is the food capital of the UK. We have, in South Shropshire, there's a big food festival that's been established for 20 years. So where Ginger and Spice is different is that, yes, we celebrate food, but it's all about that heritage. So it's our unique story that no other festival can replicate. And that's exactly what we're trying to do and connect with the community. So they make it, take ownership over it in many ways. And the other thing is, although we obviously celebrate the culinary heritage, it's not just about food. We use the arts to engage with that story. So that may be through food theatre. And we have some amazing chefs that do super creative stuff with food. And it's a real delight to watch. But we also have musicians that come. We tend to sort of explore the jazz genre as well. So we feel that it connects quite nicely with the Spice theme. We have authors. We have a poet in residence. We have pop-up cookery events and dining clubs, and a brewery tour. So there's all sorts of things. So it's all about exploring each individual element within the town and bringing it all together in a masala mix.
The difference between our festival and others is that it's primarily literature authors, and I like to bring in people like theatre persons, playwrights who write politically driven theatre. I bring in poets who write about various issues, the similarities between the Aboriginals and the immigrants to Canada. So, people have, with all the festivals I've programmed, it's always been a little different because I like to link the two cultures together. For me, that's really important because everyone tends to just live in their little silos. Yep. So sorry, I get confused. Next one, what were your challenges and breakthroughs?
You have about 3 hours? Well, so many challenges really when you start something. Of course, you know this, Julia, when you in the first couple of years is when nobody wants to support you because you haven't done anything. So I don't blame them, but then at the same time, that's when you need the most help. And so getting it off the ground, it's selling that vision. It's always, of course, about finding the money, finding one or two authors who might champion you and say, I don't know what you're doing, but it sounds like you're onto a good thing, I'll come. And you need one or two people to do that, to give you that little bit of momentum to get going. But over the years, I mean, one of the interesting challenges I've had is what you do, say, with the drama of landscape. I'm in one of the most physically beautiful cities on earth with mountains and oceans, and you don't want people in an auditorium in the summer listening to somebody. So how do you play with landscape? How can that be part of the programming we do? How can that inform the way we think of literature? I mean, I think, for example, and a great writer originally from the city, Amitav Ghosh, wrote this book, The Great Derangement, is why isn't enough literature or art speaking about climate change in the most urgent possible way? I mean, there is going to be nothing else to talk about very soon if we don't get to it. And so maybe that's something that you could do with a festival that is embedded in landscape. So yeah, all these challenges. But, you know, of course, the challenge always is that how long can all of us stretch enough to make this thing happen? Also now there's 1,000 literary festivals everywhere, 1,000 every kind of festival everywhere. So, and there's Netflix. And so, you know, how in this era of saturation of experience, of constant storytelling, whether it's advertising or it's cinema or it's books, do we say something that actually needs saying? And so we have to be very careful about where and why we say something.
Exactly.
Thanks. So one of our challenges was, yes, we wanted to have an exciting street market on the Saturday, and that meant bringing in stallholders from the area, not just from the town, from just outside. And I knew if we did that, the first challenge and the first problem I would get was the shopkeepers saying to me, well, of course, nobody's going to come into the shops if you have market stalls. So I thought, right, this is a real problem. How can we sort of come about supporting them? So because of that, we developed our Spice Trail, and we've done a series of questions that takes all festival goers on a trail around the town that goes in and out of shops, pubs, the community centres, the brewery, and they have to sort of follow a trail, answer a question, and we turned it into a competition. Now, that was very successful in the first year, and in the second year, it doubled with participants, and also shops doubled their income on the day to a normal Saturday. So that was a really great achievement, and we were delighted with that. We've also got the big challenge in the UK of the weather. So we have this outdoor market. It could completely rain. And we haven't got a venue big enough to accommodate it. So that is an ongoing challenge, and we have to weatherproof by putting the festival on several days in case, you know, we have a washout on one day. In terms of gathering support initially, that is very difficult, but very luckily for the festival, we have piggybacked a national campaign in Britain called British Food Fortnight, which is run by the government, and also it's backed by some national sponsors, the Telegraph newspaper, and a big multinational supermarket. We ran the festival in that time, and anyone that runs a festival or an event can enter an award, and I did enter it, thinking I may as well, why not? And miraculously, we won it in our first year. That was judged by our Secretary for the Environment and State, and also famous chefs in the country. Raymond Blanc was one. So it gave us really great PR profile in our first year, and it really pleased the town council as well, because it put the town, you know, on a different level, and it was noticed, it was in the Telegraph newspaper, and the gingerbread story was told, which was really exciting. So that has certainly helped us with gaining credibility and support, although, you know, it's an ongoing challenge.
Actually, I'd just like to add that I think I have a lot of very obvious challenges from China, you know, being in China and operating in that environment. But I think one of the challenges that we are coming up to our 18th festival. So it's a long, you know, it goes on, and every year you've got to try to make sure it's relevant to as many people as possible. And what I noticed, actually, just a bit about programming, is that when we started, we had quite a lot of fiction, and you always need one or two famous people, and then the rest of it you can tack on. And I'm here to tell you it's never the famous people who actually the best sessions. The best sessions are always total surprises of something that you get dragged along to that you sort of think, oh my God, I have to sit through that, and it's brilliant. And you know, so I think I'm sure that's what happens in a lot of places, which is why you should go to things that you look at it and think, oh, I don't know, go, because you're here, so why not? But you know, we had how to do that every year, and how ours has changed has gone from being sort of fiction and quite a lot of well-known people, and also people coming into China who you have to say to them, please don't tell anybody you're a writer. Very famous people don't have any problem with that, but people who nobody ever heard of have a big problem with that. They insist on getting a visa for a writer, and so therefore you get some unknown children's author being refused entry to China. So things like that are sort of really crazy. But what I do want to say is that now there is much more interest in non-fiction. There is more and more interest in non-fiction than there was 15 years ago. And I see this more and more and more. And trying to push, I'm a fiction lover, and trying to push fiction and trying to encourage people to read fiction, one of my great challenges.
How are we running? I think How do you decide upon the formats and your programming, most importantly? Sirish?
I don't know, maybe a culinary analogy. It's just you're cooking up a narrative, and I work, because we have these many disciplines, many venues, many cultures, I work every year to a theme, and I try to make a theme that's as broad as possible. Last year it was myth-making, and of course, ever since we arrived on this planet, all of us have been trying to figure out how we got here and what put us here and where are we headed, and that's basically all we've been doing for a few million years. And then we have also myth-making. We have the myth of money, the myth of the nation, all these myths that we've constructed that we need to just function with each other as a society. We have fake news, which is our contemporary myth-making. And so it just, you know, when you have a theme that's good enough to link many cultures, but also broad enough that it's interpretable, I think that's my approach to programming. And then from there, the artists really take over and create the story.
Yeah, for me, it's inclusiveness, and that includes the LGBTQ component, people who are physically challenged, you know, diverse voices. People. I had an Afghani writer, one of my authors is Calcutta Chinese, called Fong Husing. So for me, that is the thing, is what makes it interesting for the audience? What else can they discover? What can they bring home and think about? For me, that decides my programming and the format.
Thanks. Well, there are so many ideas and things we could do, but you have to be careful on sort of focusing in and not going too broad. But we go out to the community at the start of the year and say, you know, what would you like to do for your events? You know, we have a local organic farm. They put on a culinary cooking course with their chef. So we go and we say, what would you like to put on? What would you like to celebrate about? You know, what's your unique story here? And some of them put events on, and then we create some others as well around the theme. We do need to try and appeal to a cross-section of the community, the elders, right down to the school children. That can be quite a challenge. It's very, very time-consuming. And I would say if any of you are thinking of starting your own festival, you will need so much energy and so much time. It is an amazing experience. It's exhilarating, but it's all-consuming. You have to live and breathe it to get it going. You have to. It's like your child. There's no let up from it. You're the driving force behind it, and it's an exciting journey. But as I said, you need bundles of energy, right?
I think we all agree that anybody who thinks a literary festival is a money-making idea is like out of their mind. It's truly a labor of love. I mean, I think anyone doing it, I'm sure Meena would agree, it's a labor of love. Yeah, it absolutely is.
Organizational skills.
I think we're...
And a test of your organizational skills.
Hello, who's out there in charge of us? Nobody.
Nobody.
Hello.
You're open to questions from the audience.
I'd just like to say I'm also Canadian, and I love festivals. I actually devoted this year to going to festivals in India. And there's so many, and I'm really enjoying it. So that's basically what I wanted to say. So keep up the good work, and I'm looking forward to going to Sirish's festival and maybe volunteering.
Great.
I'd just like to say a few words here about our festival, which we are currently enjoying. I hope everybody's enjoying it. And we also thought along the way about how we would like to project what we'd like to bring into the festival. And I've noticed that none of you did mention the city of where you are hosting the festival. Now, I think the city plays a very big role in any festival, and a city like Calcutta, it just demands a certain kind of programming, a certain kind of audience, and coming from a bookstore, let's go to the beginning. When you're coming from a bookstore, you definitely stock each bookstore. We do in Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta differently, because the reading habits of those people from those cities may differ, and do differ in fact. So I always feel that the city plays a very important role in any festival. And involuntarily, you will program it the way it will appeal to Toronto, to Vancouver, to Shanghai, and to your festival. So I thought I'd just say a bit about that. The city is a very big player.
Very big player.
Can I just say that actually, if we didn't do sessions on Shanghai, the most packed sessions, unless it's a, Man Booker Prize winner or a Nobel laureate or somebody, are sessions on Shanghai. We have a joke and we say that we could talk about public toilets in the 1920s in Shanghai at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and it would be packed. It doesn't matter. You can talk about anything about Shanghai, and it's packed, especially anything about the 20s or 30s. And we especially love in Shanghai sleazy stories of sort of like the terrible side of Shanghai. Nobody's in the least bit interested in talking about the Cultural Revolution. Actually, they're not. Anyway, it's just crazy. It's, we don't really encourage, well, you can talk about the Cultural Revolution, but people want to hear about the 20s and the 30s. This idea of glamour in Shanghai is just sort of stuck in everybody's head. Yeah. And it's essential. I mean, it's fundamental to a festival in a place, a sense of place. But you're right, Meena, a sense of place is truly fundamental to the place. Yeah, and to the festival.
Sirish was very right when he said that he brings in the geography of the city into his festival and incorporates it. Very important.
Okay, I think we should probably wind it up. But I was just curious, Michelle. Closer. I was curious, Michelle, to know if there's any particular category of non-fiction which you have seen greater interest in Is it political? Is it sort of photography, decoration, gardening,
No,
cookery?
I think it's the sciences. I think there's much more. I think science is really sexy right now, and I think people are writing about sort of natural sciences, geography, gene editing, sort of biomedicine, all those sorts of the movement and the changes in the world of science are actually more and more interesting, and there is much more interest in them. Yeah, that's my experience. Anybody else? Do you find that? I mean, Sirish, is that your experience? I mean, is that? Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, as I was saying, I mentioned briefly earlier, but I think in the next decade, we're going to speak a lot more, and this is perhaps Vancouver, North American context, but the two topics I see are artificial intelligence and climate change. And that's what everyone's going to try and wrap their heads around. It will be different from place to place, and I think there'll be movements, but I think in terms of the stories of the next decade, I think we will see a lot more of that. So I'm quite interested, yeah.
And actually, the other thing that I've noticed is that science fiction is actually now, there's more interest in science fiction. 10 years ago, we had a writer called Marjorie Liu who wrote sort of science fiction fantasy. And, it was not a very big session, but the people who came were all dressed up. It was cosplay. I'd never heard of cosplay at that point, all dressed up in costumes. And this year we have a writer, Haljin Feng, who is a Chinese science fiction writer, a woman, and there's real interest in it. And actually in China, there is now so much more writing. 20 years ago, there just wasn't very much published by Chinese writers. There's now this generation that's come up of writers in China, and that's a fantastic thing to celebrate and to be able to, participate in.
Hello. I would like to ask that what are the difficulties and challenges that you face to organize literary festival or any kind of festival on this scale?
I think we talked a little bit about challenges. I mean, they are manifold. I think one, it depends how big it is. So I think the bigger something is, with the more venues, the more challenges you would have, because you've got logistical challenges. For somebody like me in Shanghai, you've got the challenge of getting 40 people flying into the city and not telling anybody that they're there for a literary festival, which they don't really understand until they get there. I think financial challenges are enormous for many, many organizations. We don't have any government funding or any government support, but you have to find supporters, whether they are consulates or embassies or schools. We have a lot of foreign schools, universities. You've got to find people who will help you financially, because it's a big, big cost. If you added up the cost of a festival, it's an enormous amount of money. And then you've got to appeal to the audience. It's like, what is going to appeal to the audience? Yeah, so they're just a couple of the small ones. There's bigger ones than that.
Then there's a challenge of finding volunteers, recruiting them, training them. And I must add that I think the Kolkata Literature Festival has done a marvellous job. We've all been assigned a host or mentor to look after us. And it is an absolute joy. It really has been a pleasure to be here. What a welcoming and beautiful city this is. Everybody is so hospitable, and I'm very, very touched. And Sneha, who's looking after me, I don't know if she's here, a huge thanks to her. She is a gorgeous girl, and I think you have done an amazing job of that, and you should be very proud of yourselves. Thank you.
Any more questions? For me, it's also very important to have the venue of a festival, especially in North America, where parking is not an issue and it's transit friendly. So we can draw in more audiences that way. Otherwise, it's a huge, huge challenge. Are we done?
I think really that's it. I mean, I hope we're not being too discouraging here, but I mean, really, if you boil it down to its basic, almost any endeavor is going to be about people. How much do you want this to happen? How passionate are you about making that happen? And how can you spread that vision so that other people want to make it happen? And if you can get all those things together, then some shape or form of it will take place. It might not be what you predicted, and you'll have to, famous Chinese saying, she who rides the tiger dare not dismount. So, you know, good luck.
Thank you to all my wonderful panelists and to Meena, to the APJ Kolkata Literature Festival for inviting us all out here and giving us a platform to, you know, talk about the nitty-gritties of organizing a literature festival. Thank you once again.
I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to mention here that we miss very greatly the co-director of Anjum Katyal, who's ill and who hasn't been here for the yesterday and today. And she has put her life and soul into this programming. So at every event, I miss her a lot. So do all her friends in the audience. But I hope she'll be better soon. You know, if you could imagine the worst that could happen, is to fall sick on the day of the festival, and seriously sick. So she's getting better now. But let's give her a big clap.
Thank you.
Well, on the occasion of the 10th edition of AKLF, I'm sure all of us here miss Anjum ma'am incredibly. But at the same time, to be having a session on the idea of curating a festival and to be talking about food and culture and literature, especially in a city like Calcutta, which sort of epitomizes these things in the context of India, is a fantastic thing to happen at AKLF. So thank you so much for being with us. You can proceed for the media interaction session in the Delegates Lounge.